Hello everyone, and welcome back to Isaiah for Mormons. If you have made it this far, all the way to chapter 30, then congratulations. That's pretty good. You know a lot about Isaiah now. You're really almost halfway. There's only 66 chapters, and you're on chapter 30 today. So, congratulations for making it this far. I know that it's a little bit difficult to try to slog through all of this, but I know that you will be rewarded in knowledge and the truth will set you free. So, glad to be with you today. We're going to be doing, like I said, chapter 30 today. There is a little bit, perhaps, of a connection between 29 and 30. There seems to be a continuation of the general theme of people who don't really get it. And Isaiah is calling out these people because they don't get it. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. You'll remember the end of chapter 29 talks about that kind of thing. It says people who are foolish will be punished. They that erred in spirit shall come to understand, and they that murmured shall learn doctrine. But then here in this next chapter, in chapter 30, we have, woe to the rebellious children, saith the Lord. In other words, those who didn't get it, at the end of chapter 29. Woe to the rebellious children, saith the Lord, that take counsel but not of me. So there is some continuity between the last chapter and this chapter, and some continuity probably between this chapter and the next. Once again, this has been compiled well, even if a lot of these things were not necessarily connected. They've been compiled well. So it's hard to know. It's nice to be able to read many chapters at a time as a unity, but we don't know how much of that was the case. Right? You can imagine the scenario. Sometimes Isaiah has the opportunity to get up and give a long speech, and a lot of people remember this speech. They can kind of get back together and generally recreate, in pretty general terms, what Isaiah said. But there may be times where only a part of the speech is remembered, or perhaps he's interrupted, and so we don't get quite as much as we would like. So that's one of the things we have to deal with Isaiah. We just have to grasp that that's going to be the case. But regardless of that, I don't like to just hack it up and look at it in little pieces. I like to observe the continuity. So remember last time what we were talking about, all these things these people are trying to do instead of trusting God. And that's kind of what we continue, the theme that we continue in this chapter. So once again, there may be thematic arrangement here, or maybe it is part of the same speech. I don't really know. But the theme works very well. So let's just jump into it here, Isaiah 30. He says, woe to the rebellious children, saith the Lord, that take counsel but not of me, and that cover with a covering but not of my spirit, that they may add sin to sin. They walk to go down into Egypt, and have not asked at my mouth, to strengthen themselves in the strength of Pharaoh, and to trust in the shadow of Egypt. Therefore shall the strength of Pharaoh be your shame, and the trust in the shadow of Egypt your confusion. For his princes were at Zon, and his ambassadors came to Hanes. They were all ashamed of a people that could not profit them, nor be in help nor profit, but a shame and also a reproach. Now, what is this? Egypt? We're back to Egypt again? What is he talking about? Well, the idea is that during the time of Isaiah, people were worried about what was going to happen with the Assyrians. That's what Isaiah continues to talk about. The beginning of the book of Isaiah, the first half roughly, he's talking about what the Assyrians are going to do and what they're currently doing. And then after Judah is leveled, at least a lot of it, by the Assyrians, Isaiah then comes and says, okay, now we're kind of picking up the pieces of our lives. What happened? Let's deal with what happened. So that's why it's a little bit different from the first half and the second half. But Assyria is the country around which the book of Isaiah revolves. And so with this chapter, he's still talking about the Assyrians, but he's talking about them trying to deal with the Assyrians. So he says, woe to the rebellious children, saith the Lord, that take counsel, but not of me. They're trying to figure out what to do, but they're not turning to God to try to figure it out. They're just trying to sort it out themselves. That cover with a covering, but not of my spirit. Now this cover with a covering is probably a little bit of a pun. The word can be used to relate to the kind of overlay with metal, something that you might do perhaps with an idol. So that may be a little bit of a pun here. Cover with a covering, they're worshiping idolatry, in other words, they're covering stuff with a covering, but it's not my spirit that they're covering themselves with. It's other deities that they're worshiping, that they may add sin to sin. So they're not just not taking counsel from me, they're taking counsels from their idols. Thus, they are adding sin to sin. That walk to go down into Egypt, in verse 2, and have not asked at my mouth. So they're going down to Egypt. They're going to go beg help from the Egyptians, but they haven't even asked God about it. They haven't even asked him if it's a good idea. They're just going to go do it. So he says, why are you going to do this? You're going to strengthen themselves in the strength of Pharaoh and to trust in the shadow of Egypt. And why are you going to trust in Pharaoh to protect you? I'm the only one that can protect you. So God says, just to prove it to you, in other words, because you did this, therefore shall the strength of Pharaoh be your shame, and the trust in the shadow of Egypt your confusion. They're going to be out of luck because they trusted in Pharaoh instead of trusting in God. But it seems like the Egyptians are just as eager to get the Israelites on their side as the Israelites are to get the Egyptians on their side. It says, verse 4, for his princes were at Zon, and his ambassadors came to Hanes. So Zon is up in the kind of northeastern part of Egypt, and Hanes is probably even further east. So it's like he keeps sending people closer and closer to Egypt to come meet with them, to try to talk to them and be like, hey guys, how would you guys like to be on our side against the Assyrians, right? So even the Egyptians are nervous and want the help of the Israelites. But let's think about this for 30 seconds. Where is Israel? It's just up the coast from Egypt. The Assyrians can't just make a straight shot straight down to Egypt. They have to go through Israel. So basically this means that the Egyptians would really love to have Israel and Judah as puppet states in between them and the giant Assyrian juggernaut pummeling its way through the Middle East, right? So they're like, oh, hey guys, you want to be allies? And by allies, you mean a buffer state, right? That's really what's going on here. But the Israelites and those in Judah just don't seem to get it. The Judahites are just like, oh yeah, we'll be buddies with the Egyptians. Well, no, that's not going to end well, right? And Isaiah is trying to point that out to them. As they were all ashamed, or perhaps they will be ashamed, you could read that. They will be ashamed of a people that could not profit them, nor be in help nor profit, but a shame and also a reproach. In other words, these guys have sent ambassadors to meet with Israel, but it's not going to work out the way that they would have liked. So then he says, the burden of the beasts of the south. Into the land of trouble and anguish, from whence come the young and old lion, the viper and the fiery flying serpent. They will carry their riches upon the shoulders of young asses, and their treasures upon the bunches of camels, to a people that shall not profit them. For the Egyptians shall help in vain and to no purpose. Therefore have I cried concerning this, their strength is to sit still. So, once again, we have the burdens again. Remember, he was always doing the burdens against the nations? Well, here, he's doing this as a part of his overall speech. And he's talking about the burden of the beasts of the south. Presumably, these are actually literally the animals going down to try to meet with the Egyptians to sort of buy their favor to make an alliance. So presumably they're carrying treasure on the backs of these animals to send them down to pay off the Egyptians to help them. That's what the Israelites are doing. So both sides seem to really want to make an alliance against the Assyrians. So he says, into the land of trouble and anguish, from whence come the young and old lion, the viper and the fiery flying serpent. Now, these are the fiery flying serpent. That's kind of a funny thing. That sounds really crazy, but it's probably just a kind of snake. There are these snakes down in Egypt that are sort of hooded snakes. They have this, it looks like they have a hood on, and that's probably what that is. So it's a hooded snake with really, really potent venom. And they still have those snakes today down in Egypt. So these are different kinds of snakes that they have down in the desert there. He says, you guys are going into this place, into this area that has all of these animals, these frankly very scary and unwelcoming animals, young and old lions, viper, this hooded snake. And the idea is, yes, you're going down here where there literally are these animals, but figuratively, Egypt is like these animals. They're going to sort of eat you alive, as it were. They're not really going to help you. It says, they will carry their riches upon the shoulders of young asses and their treasures upon the bunches of camels to a people that shall not profit them. So they're going to go down and carry all this treasure down to the Egyptians to try to get their help, but it's not going to do them any good, in other words. For the Egyptians shall help in vain and to no purpose. Therefore have I cried concerning this, their strength is to sit still. Now you're going to try to buy off the Egyptians to help you. They're not going to help. They're going to do literally nothing when the Assyrians come to town. They are not going to help you at all. Now, what's interesting about this is that Isaiah is right about this. But it's kind of interesting how it really ends up playing out. So, down in Egypt at this time is not just the Egyptians that we usually think of. The people that are the head honchos in Egypt right now are the Nubians. Remember, we talked about them before. The Nubians are from the south, what is today the Sudan area. So they have come up, they've conquered Egypt, and they are, like I said, kind of the big dogs on the block at that point. They're the kind of the new kids in the neighborhood as well, because usually the Egyptians are more related to other Mediterranean cultures than they are to sort of sub-Saharan Africans. But this is this new group of sub-Saharan Africans that have taken over Egypt, and they're the big power right now. So the Israelites have the Egyptians, the Nubians on one hand, and the Assyrians on the other hand, and both have imperialistic ideals for themselves. Okay, so Israel really had Judah not relied on the Egyptians at all, I think it's pretty clear God would have saved them. I think that's what Isaiah is saying. But they do rely on Egypt, and so it makes it a little bit more complicated. What ends up happening, we'll get to this later, but what does end up happening is God comes, he smites the Assyrians. We'll explain exactly how that happens in a later lecture. But then it appears that the Egyptians do come up and start to give them trouble. And since they've been weakened already, the Egyptians end up kind of chasing them off. So God could have taken care of the problem himself, but since they did make an alliance with Egypt, they did try to get Egypt to help them, the Egyptians come up and help. So really, they end up helping, but they end up being too little help, too late in the game to really be that much use to Judah. So his assessment actually is fairly accurate of what's going to happen with the Egyptians. So then he continues, "Now go, write it before them in a table, and note it in a book, that it may be for the time to come forever and ever. That this is a rebellious people, lying children, children that will not hear the law of the Lord, which say to the seers, See not, and to the prophets, Prophesy not unto us right things, speak unto us smooth things, prophesy deceits. Get you out of the way, turn aside out of the path, cause the Holy One of Israel to cease from before us. Wherefore thus saith the Holy One of Israel, because ye despise this word, and trust in oppression and perverseness, and stay thereon, therefore this iniquity shall be unto you as a breach ready to fall, swelling out in a high wall, whose breaking cometh suddenly at an instant. And he shall break it as the breaking of a potter's vessel that is broken in pieces. He shall not spare, so that there shall not be found in the bursting of it a sure to take fire from the hearth, or to take water withal out of the pit." So remember, he's been saying, the Egyptians are good for nothing. The Nubians are not going to help you. They're only good for sitting around and doing nothing. That's what he said in verse 7. They end up basically helping way too late, not really doing anything for the vast majority of the people in Judah. And at the very last minute they come in to help. So not terribly helpful. So now he says to write that down. Now go write it before them in a table, and note it in a book, that it may be for the time to come forever and ever. So he's going to write it down before it happens, so that and that there will be proof that he wrote it down before it happened. And they'll be able to see it and go, oh yeah, Isaiah said the Egyptians were going to be totally worthless, and he said it before it happened. It says that this is a rebellious people, lying children, children that will not hear the law of the Lord. So he says, this is a rebellious people. These people are not doing what God has said. He's compared Israel to children on multiple occasions. Now he says, They're not just rebellious, they're lying children. They're children that don't listen to the law of the Lord. And they don't want the Lord to speak to them. He says, which say to the seers, see not, and to the prophets, prophesy not unto us right things, speak unto us smooth things, prophesy deceits. So they don't want to hear about what the prophets usually have to say. They don't want to hear about prophets telling them to do the right things. They tell us easy things to do. Tell us lies even. We don't really want to know the right thing to do because we're not going to do it. Now, this is the accusation leveled against a lot of people in the Book of Mormon and in the New Testament and in other parts of the Old Testament, that they don't really want real prophets. They want false prophets that will tell them good things. That's the classic Antichrist move in the Book of Mormon. A false prophet who comes around and says, everything's going great, and by the way, Jesus isn't coming, right? And that's the kind of thing I think he's talking about here. So then he says, we don't want real prophecy. We want you to just tell us what we want to hear. So get you out of the way, turn aside out of the path, cause the Holy One of Israel to cease from before us. So in other words, he says, why are you walking in this path? Remember that this is the motif that keeps running through the whole of the book of Isaiah, that there's this way, the sacred path leading up to the temple. And everyone is presumably supposed to be walking this path going up to the temple, at least symbolically. And they say, get off this path. Because then literally the Holy One of Israel, the Lord, would be before you at the end of the road going up to the temple. But he says, no, get off the path. They don't want to be on the path anymore. They say, we don't want to be on the path leading to the temple. We don't want our prophets to walk this path. We want to do our own thing. Wherefore, thus saith the Holy One of Israel, because ye despise this word, and trust in oppression and perverseness, and stay thereon, therefore this iniquity shall be to you as a breach ready to fall, swelling out in a high wall, whose breaking cometh suddenly at an instant. So he says, okay, fine. You're not going to listen to me? You don't want to do what it says in the law of Moses? You want oppression and perverseness instead? That's what you rely on? It says stay thereon? Okay, fine. But this is not going to end well for you. And you have to remember, when we think of the law of Moses today, we think of what is probably a later iteration of the law of Moses. The law of Moses is continuously being edited, and it's not always edited by the right people. Jeremiah actually specifically calls people out for editing the law of Moses badly. And he says, basically, the law of Moses was originally about good morals and doing the right thing. But you guys have thrown in a bunch of extra stuff that's kind of worthless. And I think that we have to remember that here. And that's really the impression that we get here from Isaiah, is that the things that God was saying to people used to just be about doing the right thing. It apparently was a little bit more simple. But people continued to add things to the law later on. And so I think this harkens back to an earlier iteration of the law of Moses before people started editing it. Now we know that this has happened. We know this has happened because of the law of Moses. Compare the law of Moses to Genesis, for example. Compare the book of Moses to Genesis, for example. You'll see that things are pretty different. And that makes me go, well, presumably that's because it's been edited quite a bit over the years. Even modern biblical scholarship and Jeremiah and at this point Isaiah gives the same impression, that there was a simpler and better version of the law of Moses which no longer exists. We have a pretty badly edited version now. And that appears to be exactly what we see here. He says, I just wanted righteousness. Why are you guys doing all this other stuff? And it's a kind of a very unsettling condemnation of what's going on in Israel and Judah right now. So he says, therefore, because he despised this word, presumably, he's talking about going up, walking on the way, presumably the way to the temple. He says, you despise this word. What is the word? Probably the Torah, the law of Moses, the old law of Moses. He says, you trust in oppression and perverseness and stay thereon instead. Presumably, oppression and perverseness is the opposite of the old law of Moses. And when you look at it carefully and how it's discussed in the Book of Mormon, presumably the Book of Mormon version is better, you can see that this is really the case, that it was largely about social justice and doing the right thing. There was some sacrificial things in there, but it was really about doing the right thing. And there wasn't a bunch of things added that were clearly not about doing the right thing. And so that opposition there, the word on the one hand, presumably the law of Moses, versus trust and oppression and perverseness, on the other hand, show his conception, Isaiah's conception of what the law of Moses was like and what it was really about. So because they're rejecting that old version of the law of Moses, therefore this iniquity shall be to you as a breach ready to fall, swelling out in a high wall whose breaking cometh suddenly at an instant. So what is this? Back when people used to try to attack cities, they would have these big walls, obviously, around the city, and you would try to break it in. It says swelling out in a high wall. So you try to break the wall in, and you continue to hit it over and over again, and eventually it would push the blocks in. So you would have this big curve in the wall. And at any moment, if you hit that one more time, it would come and just completely collapse the wall. And that's the image that he's painting here. This iniquity, trusting in, rejecting presumably the law of Moses, and trusting in oppression and perverseness, it's like a breach ready to fall, swelling out in a high wall. It's this continuing curve in the wall being created by the battering ram, and you never know if the next hit is going to take you down. The wall seems more or less stable, minus a little bit of a bump, but at any moment the wall could collapse on you, and that's the idea here. His breaking cometh suddenly at an instant, and he says, as soon as it comes, he shall break it as the breaking of the potter's vessel that is broken in pieces. He shall not spare, so that there shall not be found in the bursting of it assured to take fire from the hearth, or to take water withal out of the pit. In other words, when that metaphorical wall breaks, it's going to break so badly it's going to be like throwing a pot down. It's going to shatter into so many tiny pieces that you don't even have a big enough little pot piece. That's what a sherd is. You don't even have a little piece of a pot big enough to get water with, or to take a little hot coal off the fire, which is what they used to use little broken pieces of pottery for. But this iniquity, it seems like it's fine, but when things go bad, it's going to go cataclysmically bad, in other words. For thus saith the Lord God, the Holy One of Israel, in returning and rest shall ye be saved, in quietness and confidence shall be your strength, and ye would not. But ye said, no, for we will flee upon horses. Therefore shall ye flee. And we will ride upon the swift. Therefore shall they that pursue you be swift. 1,000 shall flee at the rebuke of one. At the rebuke of 5 shall ye flee, till ye be left as a beacon upon the top of a mountain, and as an ensign on a hill. And God said, listen, all I wanted for you was to do the right thing. In returning and rest shall ye be saved. In quietness and in confidence shall be your strength, and ye would not. Just come back to me, and don't worry about this. I'm going to take care of you. In quietness and confidence shall be your strength. Don't worry about this. Trust me to take care of you. But no, you wouldn't do it. Ye said, no, for we will flee upon horses. He says, we got to go down to Egypt and get horses and stuff. We got to get people to help us out with this. And he says, okay, you're going to flee upon horses? You're going to ride upon horses against the Assyrians? Therefore shall ye flee. He's using puns here. So you can flee, as it were, upon horses, ride horses to go and attack the enemy. But he says, really, instead of riding to attack the enemy on horses, you're going to just be running away. We will ride upon the swift. You're going to ride upon swift horses. Presumably they're going down to Egypt to get horses. Therefore shall they that pursue you be swift. So you thought you were going to be able to ride these fast horses. Well, instead, the ones pursuing you were going to be fast. You didn't listen to me. You tried to get allies somewhere else. Well, things are not going to work out for you. There's 1,000 shall flee at the rebuke of one. So one person, one little Assyrian guy is going to be chasing 1,000 Israelites, and nobody's going to think to turn around and kill the one Assyrian. At the rebuke of 5, shall ye flee, presumably all of you. It will only take 5 Assyrians to wipe out the whole country. That's an exaggeration, obviously, but it harkens back to things in Deuteronomy, once again showing that parts of Deuteronomy are probably pretty good and probably pretty old. This is one of the curses that you see in Deuteronomy and other places in the law of Moses, that if they don't obey, a teeny tiny army of their enemies will put all of them to flight. They'll all have to run away because of a little tiny army. Till ye be left as a beacon upon the top of a mountain and an ensign on a hill. So there's just going to be one little tiny group left, like a beacon on a mountain or an ensign on a hill. Now a beacon was a fire that you would light on a mountain to signal that everyone else could see, but it's the only thing out there. You would have these beacons that you would light, and someone else on another hilltop far away would see the light, and they would light their light, and then the next person would see it. But a lot of times it's the only thing around. And that's the image that we're getting here. There's nothing left but this one little tiny group. There's an ensign on a hill, same kind of thing. There's just this lone flag on top of the hill. There isn't really much left. It's something that's very visible, but that's all there is. And that's exactly what happens. Everything gets taken out in Judah except for Jerusalem. And as they're about to attack, the Lord smites them. They get the 1-2 punch from the Lord and then from the good old Nubians down there in Egypt. And then they have to head for the hills. So really there's just this one little thing left, like a beacon on a mountain or an ensign on a hill. And that's the only thing left. And so that's really what happens. So then he continues in verse 18. And therefore will the Lord wait, that he may be gracious unto you. Therefore will he be exalted, that he may have mercy upon you. For the Lord is a God of judgment. Blessed are all they that wait for him. For the people shall dwell in Zion at Jerusalem. Thou shalt weep no more. He will be very gracious unto thee at the voice of thy cry. When he shall hear it, he will answer thee. And though the Lord give you the bread of adversity and the water of affliction, yet shall not thy teachers be removed into a corner any more. But thine eyes shall see thy teachers, and thine ears shall hear a word behind thee, saying, This is the way, walk ye in it, when ye shall turn to the right hand, and when ye turn to the left. So he says, and therefore will the Lord wait. For this reason, that he may be gracious unto you. That's why he's waiting. Therefore will he be, for this reason, will he be exalted. He may have mercy upon you. For the Lord is a God of judgment or justice. Blessed are all they that wait for him. He's going to not completely wipe everything out. There is going to be a little bit left, aka Jerusalem. He is going to have mercy on them. Why? Because he's a God of judgment, or like I said, justice. Blessed are all they that wait for him, or wait on him, I might say. So God is going to be the one that's going to take care of you. And in that day, you'll see that God was the one that was always taking care of you. You really should have turned to him, because he was the one taking care of you this whole time. And he says specifically what's going to happen. The people shall dwell in Zion at Jerusalem. He's going to save Jerusalem. Thou shalt weep no more. He will be very gracious unto thee at the voice of thy cry. When he shall hear it, he will answer thee. So in other words, he's going to continue to punish and punish and punish Judah, allow the Assyrians to come in and lay waste to everything, until finally they get it and they repent. And then he will have mercy on them. I think that's very apt. And I think that for us today, that is exactly how things work. Sometimes really bad things happen, but God is going to show mercy on us if we trust him. And though the Lord give you the bread of adversity and the water of affliction, yet shall not thy teachers be removed into a corner any more, but thine eyes shall see thy teachers. Bread of adversity and water of affliction may actually be something really bad, actually. It may be a euphemism for people having to consume their own excrement because they're out of food, right? That's the idea. And actually, when the Assyrians come, they say that very thing. So, in other words, you're reduced so low by the siege, you're eating literally anything you can. That may be the implication here. Yet shall not thy teachers be removed into a corner any more. And you could translate that, based on some other versions, your teachers won't be taken away anymore. Your eyes will see your teachers. The idea being, you guys would not listen to anything that God said to you. Well, now that you are, in the words of Rab Shakal, which we'll read later in the book of Isaiah, eating their own dung and drinking their own urine, suddenly the things that the prophets and teachers had said are sounding a lot better to them. Finally, they've been reduced so low, they're repenting. It says, thine eyes shall see thy teachers, and thine ears shall hear a word behind thee, saying, this is the way, walk ye in it, when you turn to the right hand and when you turn to the left. But this is interesting. It says, thine eyes shall see thy teachers. Okay, so finally the teachers will be able to perhaps come out of hiding. Their eyes will see them, and they'll be able to instruct the people. But then thy ears shall hear a word behind thee. Now what does that mean? Why does he say, this is the way, walk ye in it, when you turn to the right hand and when you turn to the left? Now there's probably a literal and figurative meaning here. Literally, these people are going to be so malnourished that they won't be able to see anymore, which does start to happen to you when you begin to starve. And so people, they'll have to be behind them and say, this is the way, walk ye in it. Here's the road, go this way. I know you can't see, so I'm going to sit behind you and tell you where to walk. But figuratively, they are blind right now. They're blind because they're not listening to the Lord. But their teachers, those that are still listening to the Lord, will help them, even though they are spiritually blind. They'll tell them, this is the right way, walk in it. And we were just talking about the path leading up to the temple. We were talking about that before, as part of this motif running through the book of Isaiah. So you said the prophets, before they said, yeah, prophets, we don't want this. We're going to get off the path. We want you to get off the path too. But at this point, when they've been reduced so low, their teachers will nudge them back onto the path. We always knew where it was. We never left the path. Here, come back on. That's the idea here. And we were talking about idolatry earlier in the chapter. So he says, ye shall defile also the covering of thy graven images of silver, the ornament of thy molten images of gold. Thou shalt cast them away as a menstruous cloth. Thou shalt say unto it, get thee hence. Then shall he give the rain of thy seed, that thou shalt sow the ground withal, the bread of the increase of the earth, and it shall be fat and plenteous. In that day shall the cattle feed in large pastures. The oxen likewise, and the young asses that ear the ground, shall eat clean provender, which hath been winnowed with the shovel and with the fan. And there shall be upon every high mountain and upon every high hill rivers and streams of water, in the day of great slaughter, when the towers fall. Moreover, the light of the moon shall be as the light of the sun, and the light of the sun shall be sevenfold as the light of 7 days, in the day that the Lord bindeth up the breach of his people, and healeth the stroke of their wound. So this is very, very different. The first half of the chapter, he really lays into them. But then he says, when you guys are reduced to nothing, less than nothing, then you'll turn to me, and I will help you. And that, I think, is the key. People have looked at Isaiah and said that there are multiple authors, and I think, as I said before, the Book of Mormon indicates that there may be multiple authors, but not in the way that people have thought. People have thought that the book of Isaiah had multiple authors because the first half, up through the Assyrian conquest, Isaiah really lays into people, and then the second half is all about mercy. But that's not really right. That's an oversimplification. Here we see Isaiah, in one chapter, is doing that. The first part, he's saying, these really bad things are going to happen. You guys are not doing the best thing. Why don't you shape up? But then he says, but when you shape up, look at all these good things that are going to happen to you. So he says, ye shall defile also the covering of thy graven images of silver, and the ornament of thy molten images of gold. Thou shalt cast them away as a menstruous cloth or an unclean thing. So these idols that you've laid over, because you never have solid gold idols or solid silver idols. That was fairly rare. But you would have things that you had gold or silver leaf that you'd overlaid. And he talks about overlaying things at the very beginning of the chapter. So he says, yeah, you guys are going to take this stuff and you're going to throw it away. Presumably defile the covering. Presumably they'll melt the little wooden idol. They'll burn the little wooden idol, and all the precious metals will melt off the outside. Presumably defile the covering. That's what that means. It says, thou shalt cast them away as a menstruous cloth. Thou shalt say unto it, get thee hence. You'll get rid of all these things that have been consecrated to idols. And, of course, the idols themselves. I'll throw them away as though they were unclean. As a menstruous cloth. It's maybe not the greatest translation. As an unclean thing, I might say. Then, once you've gotten rid of your idols, then he shall give the rain of thy seed, and thou shalt sow the ground withal, and the bread of the increase of the earth, and it shall be fat and plenteous. In that day shall thy cattle feed in large pastures. So he'll give rain for the seeds that you planted in the ground, and you'll use the new seeds that grow, and you'll plant again. The bread of the increase of the earth. You'll eat from the increase of the earth. Everything that's been destroyed will be rebuilt. And there'll be a huge amount of it. It'll be fat and plenteous. Your cattle will be able to have all the rangeland they could possibly want. The oxen likewise and the young asses that ear the ground shall eat clean provender, which hath been winnowed with the shovel and with the fan. There will be so much grain, you won't even have to send your animals to go out and graze. You'll actually be able to feed them grain. We, of course, do that a lot today, but that was pretty rare back then. The point of animals was that you could send them out and they could eat grass, which were things people couldn't eat, right? He says, you'll have so much grain, you'll be able to feed them grain even. And there shall be upon every high mountain and upon every high hill rivers and streams of waters in the day of great slaughter when the towers fall. So presumably, he's alluded to this before, but there may be more to the destruction of the Assyrian army than what we've talked about and what is talked about later on in the book of Isaiah. Maybe he has a giant storm that he creates. He talks about there will be on every high mountain, on every high hill, rivers and streams of water in the day of great slaughter when the towers fall. The Assyrians used to have these giant siege towers that they would put up next to the city. So presumably he's saying, not only have you guys had problems with the Assyrians, you guys apparently have had problems with growing grain and things. But when you guys repent, I'm going to send the rain, I'm going to send it in a big way. I'm going to wash away all of the filth that is accumulated because of the Assyrians. There's going to be water flowing down all the mountains, all the high hills. There's going to be rivers of it. And I'm going to slaughter, it says, the Assyrians, and that those siege towers are going to fall. Presumably they're going to be washed away. So he may be talking literally here. He may be talking figuratively. He is depicted as a storm god sometimes in the scriptures because he covers all the functions of all the deities, so he can do whatever he wants, right? So sometimes he's depicted as a storm god. So if he's creating these big streams and rivers, that may be a symbolic way of them saying he's going to destroy the Assyrians. But it could be literally that there was some kind of giant storm that helped to wipe out the Assyrians. That's a possibility. And that it literally is washing the siege towers away. That is a possibility. Moreover, the light of the moon shall be as the light of the sun, and the light of the sun shall be sevenfold, as the light of 7 days, in the day that the Lord bindeth up the breach of his people, and healeth the stroke of their wound. So, in other words, it's the light. He's talking about the things that create agricultural products, right? Water and sunlight. And so the light is going to burst on the people that have been in spiritual darkness and emotional darkness from being in warfare so much. Everything is going to light up. Everything is going to be better. And God is going to heal their wounds. He says he's going to bind up the breach of his people. Remember, he was talking about the breach that was ready to fall in any moment. He says, but if you guys repent, I'll fix that hole in the wall. I'll fix what has happened. I'll heal your wounds if you just come back to me. You will live in the light. And that is a really beautiful and hopeful image. So here, let's look at what happens, though. He's talking about the light. So what is the light? Well, there's, I think, kind of a double meaning here. I think he's talking about physical and spiritual and emotional light that they're feeling. But is it the light of the sun? Yeah, sure. Is it the light of the moon? Yeah, sure. Is it fire? Yeah, perhaps. As we get in 27. Behold, the name of the Lord cometh from far, burning with his anger, and the burden thereof is heavy. His lips are full of indignation, and his tongue as a devouring fire. And his breath as an overflowing stream shall reach to the midst of the neck, to sift the nations with the sieve of vanity. There shall be a bridle in the jaws of the people, causing them to err. Ye shall have a song, as in the night when a holy solemnity is kept, and gladness of heart as when one goeth with a pipe to come into the mountain of the Lord, to the mighty one of Israel. And the Lord shall cause his glorious voice to be heard, and shall show the lighting down of his arm with the indignation of his anger, and with the flame of a devouring fire, with scattering and tempest and hailstones. So once again, the storm imagery is pretty big here, and I think that may be what he was alluding to there. The light is going to be so intense. Why? Perhaps because he's lighting fires. The name of the Lord cometh from far, burning with his anger, and the burden thereof is heavy. His lips are full of indignation, and his tongue as a devouring fire. So God is going to come, and he's going to basically breathe fire on these people, right? But it may be him actually talking about sending a storm. We've been talking about this throughout this. But also it says, the name of the Lord cometh from far, and his lips are full of indignation. So I think this may once again go back to Genesis. Remember, in Genesis, God speaks and things happen. Also in the book of Moses. And so it may be the same kind of thing here. But before, when he speaks, things are created. Well, now when he speaks, he kind of breathes fire and everything is destroyed. His breath as an overflowing stream shall reach to the midst of the neck, to sift the nations with the sieve of vanity. So, once again, overflowing stream sometimes is... So you have this fire imagery. Overflowing stream can be fire, can also be water. Presumably there's both in this case. And so it will reach to the midst of the neck, to sift the nations with the sieve of vanity. Now this is an image that we have seen before from the Septuagint of Isaiah. The idea that God is going to sift the nations. He's going to kind of sort the good and the evil, and he's going to burn the evil and preserve the good. That's the idea that we get, this agricultural imagery, because that's what happens, right? You take the wheat, you thresh it, and the little straw bits you burn, and you keep the wheat safe. I think that's the idea here. So this overflowing stream, perhaps even a stream of fire, will reach to the neck. You'll sift the nations with the sieve of vanity. You'll separate the good from the bad. And there shall be a bridle in the jaws of the people, causing them to err. So the idea is, who are really the ones that have been doing all this? What's been going on with Israel and Judah? Well, God had been controlling the Assyrians to punish Israel and Judah. So it's like he has a bridle in the jaws of these nations to make them do what he wants. But now he's going to pull on that bridle to get them to go back the way they came and to not attack Israel anymore. That's the idea. You shall have a song, as in the night when a holy solemnity is kept, and gladness of heart as when one goeth with a pipe to come into the mountain of the Lord, to the mighty one of Israel. So once again, we have the image of them being back on the path that leads up to the temple. God's going to destroy Israel's enemies and Judah's enemies, and they're going to walk on this path leading up to the temple. As in the night when a holy solemnity is kept. That's something you do at the temple. Gladness of heart is when one goeth with a pipe to come into the mountain of the Lord. Presumably when they would go up to the mountain of the Lord, it was not just like walking up this hill. It was a celebratory thing. You You would play instruments and celebrate as you walked up to the mountain of the Lord, to the mighty one of Israel, the strong deity that's able to destroy all these other nations. And the Lord shall cause his glorious voice to be heard, and shall show the lighting down of his arm with the indignation of his anger, and with the flame of a devouring fire, with scattering and tempest and hailstones. Once again, this massive storm. As people are celebrating going up to the temple, everybody else, the Assyrians, are being wiped out with this storm. The lighting down of his arm, presumably lightning, actually. A flame of devouring fire. Right, you can see this image here. For through the voice of the Lord shall the Assyrian be beaten down, which smote with a rod. So the Assyrians were smiting everyone else. Well, now God is going to smite the smiters. And in every place where the grounded staff shall pass, which the Lord shall lay upon him, it shall be with tabrets and harps, and in battles of shaking will he fight with it. Now, this is a little bit odd. I would translate this pretty differently. I would say, in every place where the tribal boundaries have been established, in every place where the tribal boundaries are, which the Lord has established, there will be tabrets and harps. So what is that? Well, it's because some words are ambiguous in Hebrew, but the idea is that there used to be tribes and there used to be tribal boundaries between the different tribes, and a lot of times these tribal boundaries were valleys, because that part of the Middle East is full of all these valleys and what are called wadis, these really steep valleys that water sometimes runs through, and there is water. And so that's the idea, that everywhere throughout all of Israel and Judah, all these places that the Lord has established, all these boundaries the Lord has established that Israel has violated, that Assyria has violated, everyone's going to be celebrating with musical instruments. And in battles of shaking will he fight with it. Once again, I wouldn't say that's probably right. I might translate that as, because it's only very slightly different between battles and bread, oddly enough, as though people fight over bread or something. I don't know. But the word is only slightly different. So it might be there will be a lot of bread in it, something like that. And also the word, one of those words is the word for heave offering. So presumably in all these border areas, people will have tabrets and pipes, and there's going to be bread and offerings given, and that fits well with the next with the next verse. For Tophet is ordained of old. Tophet is a place where you would go to offer offerings. But later on, it's very clear that this is not a place where you would go to offer to the Lord. This is a place where you would go to offer to a deity called Molech. So I'm going to read the verse and then explain it. For Tophet is ordained of old, yea, for the king it is prepared. He hath made it deep and large. The pile thereof is fire and much wood. The breath of the Lord like a stream of brimstone doth kindle it. So here is saying, every place that God has established for the borders of the people, there will be tabrets and harps. People will be celebrating it all throughout the whole area. And with bread and heave offerings, they will present these things there. For Tophet is ordained of old. Now, Tophet presumably is a place in the Hinnom Valley, which is a valley very close to Jerusalem. So, once again, we've been talking about borders. Well, this is another border place where things are going to be prepared for worship. But what's interesting is, it says, yea, for the king it is prepared. Now, remember how ancient Hebrew texts don't have vowels? Well, this, when they put the vowels in, they say it's for the king. But it could just as easily be for Molech. And Molech is presumably a pagan deity. We don't even actually know that much about it. It's a very complicated issue. But at this place, Tophet, presumably that's where they usually worship what may be this Canaan deity, Molech. So they have this offering ready for Molech at the place where they always worship Molech, Tophet. He's made it, people have made it deep and large. It's a giant pile with much wood, but the breath of the Lord is the one that kindles it. So the idea is they have this sacrifice ready. People are celebrating, they're making all these big celebrations, and some people have the sacrifice ready for Molech. But God is the one that is going to accept the offering. So it's almost like back before they repented, they had this giant sacrifice ready for Molech. But then God is going to be the one that comes down and burns up the sacrifice and takes the sacrifice that was going to be for Molech. He takes it for himself. Because that's often what happens, is God will come down and burn up the sacrifice himself. That happens in Leviticus. That happens at the dedication of the Temple of Solomon, etc., etc. God is the one that appears to accept the offering. Even in the Elijah story, God's the one that burns up the offering. So there are many occasions where this happens. So he seems to be alluding to that idea. That there was an offering, obviously not an offering of children, which are sometimes offered to Molech, but there's going to be an offering offered to Molech of bread and heave offerings, which is what he says in 32, and then God is going to come, the Lord is going to come and burn up that offering and take it for himself. They've set up this offering to Molech, but nobody's worshiping Molech anymore, so God is going to take the offering for himself. So that's the idea. It's a very complicated and probably corrupt couple of verses. But the idea is very hopeful. When we look at it on the whole, they start off doing really bad. They're going down to Egypt to get help instead of trusting in God, and they don't want prophets. They want to be off the path. But when God has humbled them enough, they repent, and everything reverses itself. People come back on the path. They start listening to the prophets. Instead of covering idols with coverings of gold and silver, they melt the idols, and they throw everything away. And then, instead of the offering that's just been sitting there that was prepared for Moloch, God takes for himself, because no one's worshiping Moloch anymore. And so that's, I think, the idea that we're looking at in this chapter, this reversal of everything. And I think that's very important for us today. We sometimes look at the world around us and we see that things are going badly for us. We may get frustrated about things that we've done, and we wonder how things can ever get better for us. But God says, listen, I know things are bad. Sometimes bad things happen to remind you to turn to God. And when you do, he'll help you. He'll get you out of whatever problems you found yourself in. Now, that's not the only reason bad things happen. Isaiah talks about that too. But sometimes, when bad things happen, it's a chance for us to reassess our lives and an opportunity for us to repent so God can help us. And when we do repent, everything will come back and to be the way that it's supposed to be. That's the message that we get here. Everything is going to reverse itself. Things that were bad are going to become good again. And that's the message, I think, that we get in this chapter. God can make everything better. And if we repent, he will make everything better. So that's it for chapter 30. And next time we'll be moving on to chapter 31. I think there is a pretty good amount of continuity there. We're getting close to the attack of the Assyrians against Jerusalem, so Isaiah is leading up to that. So we'll talk about that later, and we will see you guys next time.